stream going. There we go. I think we're actually functioning now. Well, today's subject I'm going to be presenting on is Bleacher and Grandstand safety and risk management. If I can make my, I can't see my cursor. We're going to go ahead with it how it is. So Bleacher and Grandstand safety and risk management. These are important parts of our overall events. We have bleachers around our ball fields, bleachers at our rodeo arenas, various different places like that. They are an essential part of getting people in a position where they can enjoy the events that we either host ourselves or allow others in the community to use our facilities. They are important. However, they can cause injuries and cost us a lot more than just money. They can hurt people. We have seen some pretty significant injuries and claims within the trust, and outside of there, we've seen outside around the country and around the world, we've seen some real tragedy involving grandstands and bleachers. Each year we see right in the neighborhood of 19,000 to 20,000 injuries that make it to the emergency department. So these are significant injuries that need some sort of medical care. About a third of those involve falls, and the majority of the people that fall are youth under 15 years old. Little kids falling in those out of bleachers or tripping and falling there. We see trips, we see lacerations, we see people getting pinched and crushed and all kinds of things like that. And then there's that catastrophic thing when we have a collapse happen. Wow. Just the terror that would happen, and how do you respond to something like that? We have thousands of people or hundreds of people getting injured, and we've got to deal with that. We don't want that to happen, and so we need to actively participate in the safety and risk management surrounding our bleachers and grandstands. So I say bleachers and grandstands, and we ought to talk about what the definition is. In a standard that I'll reference here in a minute, it says that bleachers are tiered seating supported on a dedicated structural system and 2 or more rows high, okay? And then it says in the same standard, grandstands are exactly the same thing. I'm reading the two definitions and I'm going forward and I'm going word by word, and I'm like, this is exactly the same thing. And that was their intention. They, in the standard, they see under bleachers, they say see grandstands, and under grandstands, they say see bleachers. Most people have a perception though that grandstands are bigger. They are our arenas around our rodeo venues or something like that. And we think of a bleacher as being something that's out at the ball fields, you know, that 2 or 3, 4 tier bleacher that people sit on to watch the Little League games. But we can use these terms interchangeably when we're talking about the standards that pertain to this. So bleachers can be fixed or portable. Many of you may have some that are on wheels. You can hook onto those with a truck or a tractor and drag those around to a different venue where we want to use those in other places. Some are fixed. Some have been there for generations. Some may be close to 50, 60, or 100 years old. And some are permanent, some are temporary. I throw a picture up here of an Olympic event. This one is looks like this is Deer Valley during the Olympics. I worked for SLOC in risk management there, and for all of these venues, we built all the outdoor venues. We built giant grandstands. They were built with a gigantic scaffold structure underneath there, and then we put bleachers and seating on top of those, and then we put tens of thousands of people in those seats. I can tell you a lot of stories about grandstands and some of the challenges that we had in putting these in place, but we don't have that much time. Bleachers and grandstands can be indoors or outdoors. We're going to focus a lot more on outdoors because that's where most of the exposure that you have is in your facilities. It's outdoor bleachers or grandstands. They can be folding or telescopic as well. Just think of your old high school gymnasium with those expandable bleachers that would fold out, and then everybody could sit there. All right, here's just a couple more pictures. They're terrible pictures, but you know what? The technology wasn't as good back in those days. So any digital pictures that we had are not that good from back in the Olympics. I wish I had some higher quality ones. Okay, I'll tell the story about this one. On the left, we have the Utah Olympic Park, the grandstands at the ski jumps. As you can see, the back side of that falls away, and it was probably, I don't have the exact measurement, but it was definitely over 100 feet, and I would say closer to 200 feet the way the slope fell away. I identified multiple issues with this set of grandstands, and I got a call from the big boss. It wasn't Mitt. The big boss was Fraser Bullock. He says, "Are you the guy that shut down the bleachers, the grandstands at the Olympic Park?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Where are you?" "I'm at the Olympic Park." He says, "Good." "Stay there. Meet me at the grandstands in 5 minutes." And anyway, he was pretty excited about things. And I walked to the top of this 200-foot fall, roughly 200. He says, "What are you talking about?" And I walked up, and we had the backrest, the guards on the back side of this that keep people from falling off the back. And I walked up to it. I walked up to one on the edge, and I grabbed a hold, and I lifted it up, and I turned around, and I reached out to Fraser and to hand it to him. And I said, "This is what I'm concerned about." And he says, "Oh, that's a problem. We need to fix that." It could have been really easy to have somebody lift up on that and have somebody fall off the back of those grandstands. It's a big deal. These are one of those low frequency, high severity type events that we could see, but on a day-to-day, we can see some pretty serious minor injuries as well from lacerations and trips and falls. Bleachers can be constructed of various different types of materials. We see in wood, metal, they can be aluminum, steel, concrete. I've even seen some grandstands more like an amphitheater, but it's really carved out of the earth. They've gone out and dug seating in. They're basically like steps that you can sit on, and they all work, and they all can fit into the standards that we have. So speaking of standards, there are a couple of standards that pertain to bleachers and grandstands. The first one is the ICC, the International Code Council. It's also an ANSI standard, American National Standard, and it dovetails with our building codes. This is kind of an addendum to the overall building codes, but a lot of these standards in there really come right along with the building code, and I'll keep going back to that. The second standard is not necessarily anything that is legal. It's more of a suggestion from the Consumer Product Safety Council, and it is guidelines for retrofitting bleachers. And so this is, if we have an old set of bleachers, what can we do to make these safe? And it provides us some guidelines for that. It hasn't been re-released for a significant amount of time, so it's kind of dated there. Whereas the ICC 300 standard was re-released in 2017. Now, with that one, I would love to be able to just send out to everybody a copy of that standard out there, but it's a copyright protected thing, and they're pretty tight on that standard. I can share parts of that And that's what I'll be doing in this presentation today. But if you have some exposure with this, it costs about I think it's $30 exactly. You can go online and pay for it and download a copy of that standard so you have the specifics. If you're buying or you're retrofitting new, you can use your vendor, or I would just go out and spend $30 and get the standard so you have that accessible. Okay. All right. Oh, and just on that, on these, when we talk about standards, these are, this one's a little bit different than other ANSI standards. Most ANSI standards are something that we hold in common. Everybody just kind of agrees that this is the standard, but it may not have legal bearing. But when it comes down to a claim or a problem with an injury, that's going to be the consensus standard that everybody's going to look to, and that's really the standard that we'll have to live up to. Now, with this one, where it dovetails with the building code, where most states, including Utah, have adopted that building code, it does have the force of law. Okay. All right. So when do these standards apply? In the ICC standard, it has basically two sections or two halves, and one is for new construction, for everything that's constructed after the day that this standard is in effect. The other is when we do alteration. If we alter, you know, we go in to close up some gaps, we add this or that to our grandstands, or we want to make those accessible to people in wheelchairs, put a ramp in, that's going to trigger this standard. Okay. Just a reminder, and I'm going to say this several times during the presentation, many of you out there will have a building official that actually works for your organization. If you're a city, use your building officials. They know the code. They know all of the things that go around handrails and egress and all of those things, or they have the capability of finding that, and they may actually have access to this standard just through their normal work. So use them. If they say, I haven't done a lot on grandstands and bleachers, say, well, we need you to have that standard. We need you to know what this standard is, not only for our facilities, but others. Okay, so use those building officials to your benefit. Okay, so what do the standards require? And it's, let me tell you, there's a lot of stuff. Here's the standard right here. There are a lot of pages in that standard, and I'm just going to give the 10,000 foot level. Well, some of it's a little more detailed than that. Let's say it's a 1,000 to 5,000 foot level. But once again, go back to your building official when it comes down to the real details on this is the number of exits, or this is how wide our aisleways need to be. Let's make sure that we're coordinating with the building official for that. Okay. All right. So some of the things it requires our construction to be durable, weather resistant, corrosion resistant, and it's particularly things, let's say, and it calls this out, if we have an indoor pool, but we have a viewing area there, and so we have some bleachers in there, those bleachers need to be particularly corrosion resistant because of the amount of chlorine that's in that room. They can be made out of combustible materials, but there's some specifics to that, and I'm not going to go into the details there. Basically, you can have wood bleachers inside of a building, but there are some caveats there, and once again, I'm going to send you back to your building official on that, so that we make sure that we've met all of those requirements. Okay. Our bleachers need to be on a sturdy foundation. What does that mean? Well, the answer is it depends. Some bleachers are designed to be freestanding. They can be set out on sturdy ground. Some are designed to be anchored to a foundation. Some need to have significant footings and foundation. Whatever it is, it needs to have a solid base. In the standard, it says they need to be anchored or ballast. What does that mean? Well, that means either they're anchored to the ground or they are weighted such that they're not going to tip over. I've actually seen a few sets of these small portable bleachers that were not ballast appropriately. And if you were the only person and you climbed up to the top tier, you just imagine one of these 4 or 5 row high bleachers. If you climbed up to the top and sat on the top, it would actually tip over. So one really important thing when we're dealing with bleachers is look at what the manufacturer requires. If the manufacturer says this needs to be anchored, it needs to be anchored. If they say it needs to be ballast with so many pounds of weight and certain types of weight, we need to do that. We need to consider our site. Look at the slope, the soil compaction, if there's water issues or anything like that, when we consider the site where we put these bleachers. I've seen several in my days of traipsing around in your facilities where the bleachers were, and most of these were portables, but they were put in a bad location where they could physically tip over, or they put people in positions where it would cause them to trip or could fall. So look at the location. All right. Under the bleachers, can we do anything under the bleachers? And the answer to that is no, unless it's approved by your fire code official. What does that mean? We don't want any combustible stored under there. We don't want cooking, or we don't want to build a little cook shack underneath the bleachers just because it's in an out of the way place. Because if we have a fire under a whole bunch of people in bleachers, that's a really bad thing. So there are some specific requirements about doing anything under the bleachers. So unless you have approval from your fire code official, don't be doing any of that kind of stuff under there. Keep our bleachers away from buildings, unless, once again, here's your building official, unless it meets some approvals for having those connected or within less than 10 feet from our grandstands or bleachers. Okay. Occupant load. This is a famous picture from a grandstand collapse that happened working on 100 years. I think it was in the 1930s. Had a massive grandstand collapse. Our occupant load, we don't want to overload this grandstand. So there's a requirement in the standard to have a live load of 100 pounds, or a rating of 100 pounds per square foot. If it's a press box up on top, it needs to have 50 pounds per square foot. There's some guidelines there on how to count the number of people, and that is 1 person per 18-inch of length of the bench. That's another Olympic story. They had, SLOC had decided that we could they had these little overhangs that were 9 inches long that we put on each end of each row of seats. And so with those 9 inches on each end of a row, they were half cheeks. And so you could get between those 2 9 inches overhangs, we could sell 1 more seat and make that much more money off of it. When we start talking open areas, so if we have a reviewing stand, so let's say there's an area that doesn't have fixed seating, but it's an area where we can stand, we need to have 5 square feet per person. If we have movable chairs, let's say we've got a deck and we're bringing in some folding chairs, that needs to have 7 square foot per individual seat. Once again, use your building official on these things. And this, I'm not going to spend any time on this, but I just want you to know that in the standard, there are some calculations that have to be made for not only the live load, but the horizontal loading and all of the different components of the bleachers and grandstands. So this is just to help convince you to use your building official. Okay. Egress. We need to be able to get people safely in and out of our bleachers. And in some situations, well, it's a little three-tier high bleacher. I'm not too worried about being able to get people in and out of that bleacher because I'm about 2 steps away from being away. But if I have a grandstand and I've got several thousand people there, and some bad event happens, there's a fire or you know, bad person comes and does something bad, how are we going to get people out of there in a hurry? We have to provide some safe egress plans for that. So once again, follow the code. The standard says that, and it's tied right in with the building code. The width and number of exits are based on the occupancy. So when we start talking that 18 inches of horizontal seat space, that's how we count bodies, how many people that we can get in there. So prior to installing or modifying the bleachers that you have or grandstands, sit down and go through a code review and say, how are we doing? Because not only is it the number of exits, but it's also ADA access, so and egress. Here's just a quick idea of the number of exits that may be required here. For 0 to 250 people, we're looking at 1 egress path. If we're up over 2,500, we're looking at least 4, and there's a lot of stuff that goes into doing that. So once again, just a reminder to get your building official involved. Okay, let's see. The next one is ADA accessibility. So the Americans with Disabilities Act is designed to provide access to everybody regardless of their ability to do certain tasks. Let's see. It requires newly constructed facilities to be accessible to people with disabilities so they, their families, and friends can enjoy an equal access to entertainment, recreation, and leisure. Okay. Older facilities, when they are significantly altered, need to be brought up to that code. And so, and it gives some guidelines in there for 0 to 500. For 0 to 500 seats, we need to have 5 spaces for wheelchairs. For 501 to 5,000, 6 places, plus 1 for every 150 people over 500, and on and on. Not only do we need to have wheelchair seating, but we also need to have ramps, landings, and things that comply with the ADA as well. Once again, bring your code official into this mix. Let's see, open spaces at floorboards and seat boards. As you look between your seats, if you can see down below, you're probably not in compliance. We need to have an opening that is less than 4 inches in diameter. So if I have a 4-inch sphere, think of a round ball that is 4 inches in diameter, that should not be able to pass through any opening below the seat. Okay, except in areas where it's less than 30 inches above the ground. So that first row of seating, we don't have to have that closed up, but above 30 inches, I have to have that. Okay, now there is an exception there for some of these smaller ones. If the top seat is less than 55 inches to the ground, then we don't have to meet that requirement. There is one other requirement here, and that's the gaps between the seat boards and the floorboards should be less than 1/4 inch. So we can't get fingers and toes down into those things. Handrails. Anything above 30 inches high needs to have handrails, with that one exception that we talked about. Once again, these handrails should not be able to pass a 4-inch sphere. Whoops, I missed a T. Cannot, 4-inch spear cannot pass through. They should be 42 inches in height, plus or minus. Existing bleachers that we have should not be less than 36 inches in height. The material that we use to close in these handrails, as you can see in this picture, this one does not meet the requirement of the standard. The materials that we put in there to fill that in need to be such that it restricts people from climbing up. We don't want kids to climb up this and fall over. So some of the examples are, here's some examples, vertical bars. So there's really no cross piece for you to get a foothold to climb up. Other things would be chain link fencing. And even though that's not the prettiest stuff that's out there, it works really well. And just going back to this other slide, the openings in that chain link, it should be 1.25 inch chain link fencing. So as we look on a square, if we turn that chain link on its edge there, it should be 1.25 inches. The standard says openings should be less than 1.75 inches in these sides. Okay. All right. Here's a big thing to remember as well. Don't forget the manufacturer's guidance. If you have bought a Bleacher system, that system has guidance from the manufacturer. They will generally send an owner's manual along with that says, here's how you have to use our system. That's the standard that we live by, in addition to, because they're going to meet the ICC standard when they sell a new piece of equipment in almost all situations. They pretty much need to live by that to be able to sell that product. But they may have something specific. It'll tell you you've got to weight your equipment, or weight your ballast on the bleachers. You have to anchor it in a certain way. There's certain inspections that you must perform. You may need to torque bolts to a certain specification. Go by what the manufacturer says. And if you can't find the owner's manual for that piece of equipment, contact them and get it. I guarantee they'll send you one, because they want you doing this right. They don't want to get sued because something went wrong with their product, just as much as you don't want to get sued because something went wrong at your park or your fairgrounds. Another important part of this whole program is inspection. And you guys get tired of Doug and Brent and myself talking about inspections and going out and looking at your facilities, but it is just essential. So in the standard, it says, and this is talking about existing grandstands, because that's probably the more detailed of the two standards. It says, these bleachers and grandstands shall be inspected and evaluated at least once a year by a qualified person for compliance with the provisions of the standard. And also each opening and closing of a folding and telescoping seating. So basically you've got to comply with the manufacturer's instructions. Like I said, we won't spend a lot of time on that, but every time you open and close those things, they need to be inspected. But for our bleachers that are sitting out in the park or at the fairgrounds, they need to be inspected at least once per year. And that inspection needs to be documented. You can use a checklist on that. For many of the manufactured systems, newer ones, they will have a checklist that they'll provide you with. And you can take that out and document it. Well, there's one important thing in this requirement. It says that it needs to be inspected by a qualified person. What the heck is a qualified person? Well, in the standard, it says a professional trained in the proper and safe use, operation, and repair of bleachers, and is knowledgeable in the requirements of this standard. Well, you got to ask yourself, do we have somebody in our organization that fits that bill as a qualified person? If not, you either need to get somebody trained up to do that, or you need to bring somebody in who is a qualified person. Okay. All right. And I just wanted to run through some things to watch for as we go out and look. As Doug and Brent and myself go out and we walk through your facilities, sometimes we see some really scary things. There have been a few that we've seen over the years. Doug and I went on one years ago, and I was literally scared for my life walking on this grandstand. We were 30 feet in the air, and there was literally one 2x6 that was not in very good shape that you would walk on. And I looked down. I'm like, oh my gosh. Kids could fall through this. And the person showing us the grandstand, I said, I'm afraid we're gonna have kids fall through here. And he said, we've had a couple. And by the time Doug and I got through looking at these grandstands, we were unanimous, and we just said, these need to go. These are unsafe, and it's not a reasonable risk for you to be putting yourself into as an organization, or putting the trust membership at risk because of the real overt risk of this structure. And to their credit, this organization went out with a bulldozer and they knocked them down. And they did it, that was, significant cost to them. But it was the right thing to do. They couldn't have made this structure safe as it was. So we got to be open to those situations. If it's time to get new ones, get new ones. But we see a lot of things that may not be quite as open to, if I'm just walking around, I may not notice these unless I'm really looking at it. So slips and trips are obviously a big thing. You can see in this picture, I took this one, there were some bolts sticking up. Well, those could be trip hazards, but they could also be laceration hazards. Look for hardware. It should all be tight, shouldn't be broken, shouldn't be worn or corroded or damaged. And so when we do these inspections, we need to get out and walk the entire thing and crawl under it and look at the various different aspects of what makes these things work. All right, I'm going to move on to a couple of things. Yeah.
Just a quick question we have here, and you might have already covered this, maybe a little more detail, but who is considered qualified to inspect these bleachers and grandstands?
Whoever can meet the definition that we saw in that. So a professional trained in the proper and safe use, operation, and repair of bleachers. So if you've got somebody that's working for your facility who has been doing this for a long time, maybe they went to a class, or they've gone through this standard. I think it leaves some leeway there, some latitude for you to determine who is a qualified person, but it's going to be on you as the owner of the bleachers to really make that determination of who that qualified person is. What does professional mean? Well, it means they're getting paid for whatever they're doing, but that could be somebody who works for you as well, in my opinion. I think they give us enough latitude there. Does that answer the question, Brent?
Yeah, that's great. And there's also one more here. They're wondering if there's going to be discussion on liability waivers for an event that has bleachers and grandstands. Will you be covering that?
Yeah, let's talk waivers really quickly. We get this question a lot, and people, well, I'll just get them to sign a waiver for it and then we'll be okay. Well, that doesn't really work for us, because the problem is waivers keep honest people honest. Waivers will not get you out of trouble if you end up in court. Waivers will be thrown out on the first day because they won't stand up, particularly if a minor is involved. You can't, even as a parent, you can't sign away a use right on a waiver. Now, that being said, some of you right now are going, well, we do waivers for mutton busting, we do waivers for baseball, and we do waivers for all of this. I'm not telling you not to do waivers. Waivers work for honest people. people who say, I put my kids in mutton busting at the county fair. And when we signed that waiver, I sent my wife to sign the waiver. When she signed that waiver, it says, your kids might die in doing this activity. They might be seriously injured. What does that tell most parents? Well, it's consent. It's informed. I know what the risk is going into this. And if my kid breaks their arm when they're mutton busting, well, I signed up for this. And so waivers are good in those situations because, you know what? I knew what I was getting into. I knew I could risk this kid. I got a few others, so I can take a risk on this one. That is that's one side of things. If something goes bad and they decide to sue you, that waiver will be thrown out, and it probably will not stand up anywhere in a court. And so we got to look at that two ways. We're not going, yeah, we'll do our waivers and all of that, but we can't rely on those to protect us. We need to do everything that we can to prevent that incident from happening to start with, and also to separate ourselves from the risk that's there. And if that means that, you know, we have vendors indemnify us and give us a certificate of insurance, that's what we want to do. If I've got somebody using my facilities for their activity, their event, and it's not one that's sponsored for us, we should be getting a certificate of insurance from them, naming our organization as an additional insured, and we should be getting some indemnification language from them. Okay. I hope that answers the question. Type Brent some other, if you want some clarification there. I gotta move along here. I'm doing, ID and inspection tags. I don't have a picture of an ID and inspection tag because I couldn't find one. I was looking and looking through my stuff, and I looked online and couldn't find one. I forgot to ask Brent and Doug on it, but I'm looking at Doug and he's shaking his head. He didn't have one either. Each of these bleachers should have a tag on there that says who the manufacturer is, when it was installed, the seating capacity, who inspected it, when it was installed, and the date of that inspection. That's an action item for all of us. As I dove back into this standard, it'd been a number of years since I read it, and I was like, huh. And maybe that was a 2017 ad, or it may or may not have been. I was like, that's something that I've got to look at more as I'm out doing risk assessments on these things. Is do we have those tags in place? And that can help us get in touch with the manufacturer. It can give us some of that key information that we need to know. Okay. We should be looking for damage. When you get out there, walk all of the bleachers. I know it takes a while to walk around through the entire rodeo arena, but walk all of those, because that one bad board, that one nail that's sticking out, bolt that's sticking out, is not going to be readily apparent from the other side of the arena. Get out there and walk under those bleachers. When we do those inspections, we need to be looking at all the components. Shake it, jump on it. But of course, don't jump too hard. We don't want you. I think if Doug and I would have jumped on the boards on that one that we were at, we would have been 30 feet down. But go out and test this, because you're going to be putting a significant load on that, and it's important. You're putting thousands of your residents on this. Look for laceration hazards. Can you see the laceration hazard in this picture? It may not be readily apparent, but right where these two pieces of metal come together, it was really sharp, and somebody was pretty significantly lacerated, cut on this bleacher. So take a look for things like that. Do I have sharp edges? Do I have things sticking out that people can walk into? Just remember how people are going to be using this. You've got a crowd and they're walking along shoulder to shoulder. They're not going to see that piece of angle iron sticking out, and they're going to bash their shin on it, and then it's going to be your fault. Okay. Look for electrical issues. I've seen some pretty scary stuff actually in some of our risk assessments that we do, where people have taken and done some creative electrical work and wound electrical wires around our metal grandstands. What happens if the insulation gets gets broken on that, and we suddenly electrify our grandstands? How big of a disaster could that be? So if there's some question about your electrical system there, use your building official. Get out and inspect these things, particularly if people are coming in and using our facilities. Sometimes they're like, yeah, we're gonna take this 240 volt extension cord and drape it up through the grandstands up where we've got, you know, our PA system or whatever. Look at those things and be aware of what's going on. Ask yourself the question, can my bleachers or my grandstands cut it? Are your bleachers designed for the type of use that you intend? If you're hosting rodeos and you have rough stock, just a regular grandstand probably isn't going to cut it. What type of fencing do we have in place that can handle a 2,000+ pound bull out there, or bucking broncs that are trying to jump up into the stands? This is actually one of my favorite all-time pictures. Look at people's faces. This is something that we've got to be realistic about and ask ourselves the question is can it really accommodate what we're trying to do with that? And sometimes it comes that our stuff needs to be replaced. It's been there a long time and it's tired and it needs to be replaced. And we need to put a plan together to either go in and retrofit it or replace that structure. And I know it's hard and it costs a lot of money, but this is important. These people's lives are at stake when we're dealing with this, and not just lives, but they could be injured. We don't want kids falling out of those things, all that stuff. All right. I intended to be done at 45 after the hour. I'm a minute late. That's not too bad. Folks, do we have any questions? You can go ahead and type those into the chat box and answer those as we get those in. Do we have any more, Brent?
Yeah, I have one here actually. Question about if OSHA is going to look for an inspection cert or a report of some kind.
OSHA probably is not going to be involved with this. And the reason being is it's not necessarily involving employee safety unless an employee were injured or if they're working around there and there was an unsafe condition. When they talk about the here, I'm losing my mind here for a second. The qualified person, that is an OSHA term that they use, but that's not really what we're talking. We're not talking OSHA. We're talking code. And so OSHA really probably wouldn't ever look at that unless we had employees that were injured or employees that were threatened. We're looking more directly at, do we meet code compliance, and are we going to be able to have a safe structure for us out there? Okay.
Yeah, code compliance is as far as building code and so forth, not so much OSHA code, yes, which can be looking. Lots of times we think of OSHA as being the end-all, be-all enforcer of safety, but you know, it's important to remember OSHA is specifically for workplace safety. And to your point, a grandstand isn't necessarily a work site. It's a entertainment facility. Yeah. And just to kind of clarify also, Jason, you were talking about, you know, waivers, you know, and I agree with you as a general rule. When people ask us about waivers, I like to say, don't count on it, because, you know, you never know exactly the circumstances of what injury, you know, we may be, you know, seeking to have some sort of liability protection from. And so until an event actually happens, until someone's actually injured or whatever, you know, and they bring that claim, You know, will the waiver protect us or not? Well, we really don't know. It depends on what was the purpose of the waiver. And there's some things that, you know, you're not going to be able to, you're going to have a real hard time waiving liability on. With a grandstand, for example, the facility needs to be maintained in proper condition and maintained for its intended purpose. And if we let this thing fall apart and then some, you know, group comes in and wants to use the grandstands, and we go, well, yeah, they don't look too good, sign this waiver and then you can use them. We may have kind of a hard time, you know, having that protect us because we have a duty, you know, owning that, you know, facility to make sure that it's maintained for its intended purpose. And so it's kind of a scary thing to think that, you know, well, we'll just get people to sign a waiver. And if we think this is risky or whatever, you need to be really careful about that. Consult your legal advisor, your attorney, and they will be able to give you the best direction on, you know, when a waiver is going to be beneficial for you and how it should be worded in order to give you that liability protection. But there's some things, you know, we just own it, and you know, we can't just think that we can have people sign a waiver and let them go their merry way when we know it's you know, it's not safe.
Sure. Thanks, Doug. All right. Anything else, Brent?
That's all I see. Great job, Jason. Great information.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. I was just another comment came in. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate the compliment there. And we really appreciate your attendance here. Feel free to share this with others in your organization that can benefit from it. Once again, we're live streaming to our YouTube channel, so it will be there as soon as it finishes. You can watch it right now, but it will take a minute to upload to the regular channel. And then you can share that out. And if you have questions, please contact us. Doug, Brent, and myself, that's our job, is to help you with these questions, to go out and do risk assessments. We're excited to get back out there when things calm down just a little bit, and we'd love to come out to your facilities and take a look and give you some advice on how you can best protect yourself. So thank you so much, folks. Go out and have a safe day.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Doug. I'm just stopping the YouTube. I guess that it all changes. My YouTube disappeared. All right. Well, thanks, folks. Appreciate you. Have a good day.